Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name's Olivia Ahern. I'm the curator of exhibitions at Nottingham Contemporary. And tonight it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our second series of Five Bodies, an online programme of poetry, writing, and text. For those of you tuning in for the first time, Nottingham Contemporary is a contemporary arts centre based in the East Midlands. We work with artists, communities, and academics to reflect on contemporary art, society, and visual cultures. This is the first session of the new series titled Entanglements, which investigates poetic ecologies in the Anthropocene, aiming to open up new conversations about coexistence, resilience, and sustainability. Five Bodies was imagined in conjunction with our colleague, Sarah Jackson, who runs the Critical Poetics Research Group at Nottingham Trent University, and Dr. Linda Kemp, a research fellow also at the university. Tonight's event includes AI-driven live captioning, which can be accessed via a link in the YouTube chat. This will open in a separate window on your browser, and within that you can adjust the scale and layout to suit your requirements. Now to our speakers this evening, I'm delighted to introduce Natalie Diaz and Nina Minya Powles. Natalie was born and raised in the Fort Mojave Indian village in Needles, California, on the banks of the Colorado River. She is Mojave and an enrolled member of the Gila River Indian tribe. Her first poetry collection, When My Brother Was an Aztec, was published by Cooper Canyon Press and won an American Book Award. Her second book, Post-Colonial Love Poem, was published by Grey Wolf Press in March 2020 and was a finalist for the National Book Award, the Forward Prize, and won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 2021. She's a 2018 MacArthur Fellow, as well as a Lannan Literary Fellow and a Native Arts Council Foundation Artist Fellow. She was awarded the Princeton Holmes National Poetry Prize and a Hodder Fellowship. She is a member of the Board of Trustees for the United States Artist, where she is an alumni of the Ford Fellowship. Diaz is director of the Center for Imagination in the Borderlands and is the Maxine and Jonathan Marshall Chair in Modern and Contemporary Poetry at Arizona State University. Joining Natalie this evening is Nina Minya Powles. Nina is a writer, poet, and maker from Aotearoa, New Zealand, currently in London. Her poetry collection, Magnolia, from 2020, was a finalist in the New Zealand Book Awards and the Forward Prizes. She is also the author of several zines and pamphlets, as well as a food memoir, Tiny Moons, from 2020, and a collection of essays, Small Bodies of Water, from 2021. The event this evening is titled River Mouth. Natalie and Nina are going to read for around 10 minutes each, and then they'll be in conversation together before giving us a final reading. As always, if you have any questions, please send your thoughts through the YouTube chat, and I'll field these to our speakers towards the end of the event. To begin with, Natalie and Nina would like to pose a question. What is a body of water that is meaningful to you? We'd like to invite you to post your responses in the chat. I'll now hand over to Nina for our first reading.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and Sarah as well for organising, and Natalie. It's such a joy to be doing this with you. As Olivia mentioned, we would love, if you want to, pop in the YouTube chat a body of water that's meaningful to you. And I've got the window kind of on the side of my screen, so it'll be lovely to see some of your places popping up as I read. And you can continue to do that throughout. And we've got a bit of space for questions at the end as well. So I'll start by reading a few poems loosely connected on the theme of water, and also I think how we are entangled with different languages, which we'll speak about later. And I've got an image to start with, which I think will appear imminently, which is a body of water of my own, and it's not the one that is nearest to me now. I'm speaking from London, but the one on the screen here, that's Wellington Harbour in Aotearoa, so the southernmost tip of Te Ika a Maui, the North Island of Aotearoa. And the particular vantage point is actually looking back at the city from Matiu Soames Island, which is a small island, an uninhabited island in the middle of the harbour, which is a nature reserve. It's really beautiful. But it was also in the late 1800s was also a quarantine island, and a number of Chinese immigrants were sent there, and one famously passed away there, never left the island. So it's a fascinating place, quite a haunted place. And it's not a view of the harbour that you normally will see from anywhere, from my parents' house or from any other point, because you're in the centre of it from that island. So I wanted to share that. It's a place I think about a lot and dream about a lot. And I'll begin with a poem that takes place in the water of that harbour. And it's called Last Summer We Were Underwater. If we could get the poem, which is the next slide along. Perfect. Last summer we were underwater, and we asked, "What are you doing there, moon?" Our bodies neck deep in salt and rain. Each crater is a sea, you said, and dived under the sun. Before I could speak, water rushing over your skin. The place where chocolate ice cream had melted and dried there like a newly formed freckle on the surface of us. And the islands crumbling apart softly over sea caves somewhere, opening my mouth into the waves to say, "You are, you are, you are." I'm gonna read now a few fragments from a sequence that's, I think, the central sequence of my book, Magnolia Mulan, which is called Field Notes on a Downpour. And it's quite long, but I'm going to read a few bits from that, which are out of order. But Field Notes on a Downpour. E. The first character of my mother's name, 1, is made of rain and language. According to the dictionary, together they mean multicolored clouds or cloud tints. There are so many things I'm trying to hold together. I write them down each day to stop them from slipping. Mouthfuls of rain, the blue undersides of clouds, her hydrangeas in the dark. Also in the dictionary under when, language, character, script. Warm, lips, lines, veins, cracks in glassware or jade. It was the summer of the watermelons. They were everywhere, tumbling out of fruit shops all along the footpath. The ripest ones split open in the gutters. Every day there is another downpour. More than 100 characters share the same sound. Zong, a symbol put together, always, footprint, trace, the uneven flight of a bird. In the morning outside your apartment, the wet leaves from last night's rain had already been swept away. Wu. The lady at the fruit shop asks me how I can be half Chinese and still look like this. She points to my hair. We come up against a word I don't know. She draws the character in the air with one finger, and it hangs there between us. Jan. Curl. To have tender feeling for. To abandon. A net for catching birds. Liu. Some things make perfect sense, like the fact that wave is made of skin and water, but most things do not. That night there were cracks in the ceiling where the rain fell through and dripped down the back of your t-shirt, then onto my arm. Last week, 200 white tundra swans were found dead beside a lake in Inner Mongolia. 2 days ago, I smashed a glass jar of honey on the kitchen floor. The glass broke, but the honey held its shards together, collapsing softly. I'll read one more poem, which is a bit newer, something that I worked on in 2021, last year, for Dead Women Poets Society, which is an amazing poetry collective. They try to resurrect past women and non-binary poets in the events that they do. We had an online seance, and I was commissioned to respond to the work of the Korean American artist and poet Teresa Hak-Kyung Cha, whose book Dictée came out in the 80s and is a really strange and fascinating and rich text. And I don't think I'll ever fully understand it. But I made this zine called Seams Traces because I became interested in the fact that Cha worked in the costume department at the Met in New York not long before she died. She was killed, actually, and sometimes her death, very often her death, overshadows the work that preceded it. So I wanted to write something about that complicated feeling. But I'll just share one poem from the zine. This is it here, and it's quite small and it folds out, a little show and tell. But this poem is called Snow Language. Your handwriting resembles mine. Small looped threads, I touch them. Entering Dictée, I pass through veils to enter a landscape of dust and lunar snow. You speak in remnants, gestures, utterances. Ghosts are not enough. Memory breathes. You wrote to your mother from Seoul. Every bird that migrates north for spring and south for winter becomes a metaphor for the longing of return. Your mouth opens. The sky opens. Fragments float down. Snow gloves, snow geese, snowdrops from heavy clouds. Language of spilled water, language of mist. Before snow, after snow, snowshoes. Language of white cloth, of commas. Bordered language, demarcated language. Snow blindness, snow-capped. Swallowed language, folded language. Snowy owl, snow pea, snowdrift. I am trying to listen to the silence. Snow mother, snowfall, snowfields. Your language of women is the language of snow. Thank you. I'll pass over to Natalie, who will read.
Gracias for having me. I'm joining you today from, luckily, I'm able to be in my homeland, so Akama Atam land. Gracias to Olivia and Sarah. This is a really beautiful energy and space you all have created, and it's definitely changed my week. So I was lucky enough to be with some of your poets and writers yesterday, and yeah, I'm still tinkering with lines I wrote alongside that group. So I really appreciate it. Also, gracias for bringing me in periphery and to be alongside Nina. It's been really lucky to begin what feels like an opening of the ways we might converge and diverge, not just on the page and work, but as poets and writers and language makers and language wanderers alongside each other. So I appreciate that. One of the ways that I have come to this, always, of course, because I'm in the desert, and also I'm in a desert with a river, which people sometimes don't associate that. And my river is one of the most endangered rivers in the United States. If you were to Google the Colorado River, you would see that it's in a space. It's the lowest our reservoirs have been. I better start a timer, or I'll go all native on you and be talking forever. And so I think a lot about ocean and ancient ocean, because my desert was an ancient ocean. I think we forget a lot that the land emerged from the ocean, that body, that life was here long before us and somehow imagined land and somehow imagined us on it. And so it feels very important to think alongside Nina and her work, and to think about the importance of diaspora and movement as well. So I'm going to read two poems to begin with you all. I'm going to read a poem called Lake Loop, which is very much about water and just a kind of meditation toward water. And then I'm going to read a newer poem that I will be taking advantage of you all, because me reading it here is going to help me revise and edit it a bit. It's a little bit more centered in my desert. So Lake Loop. Because there was yet no lake, into many nights we made the lake a labor and its necessary laborings, to find the basin not yet opened in my body, yet my body, any body, wet or water from the start, to fill a clay. Start being what it ever means, a beginning. The earth's first hand on a vision quest, wildering night skin fields for touch, like a dark horse made of air. Turned downward in the dusk opaquing, a hand resembles its ancestors, the war, or the horse who war made. What it means to be made, to be ruined before becoming. Rift, glacial ablation and breaking, lake hip sloping, fluvial, then spilled. I unzip the lake, walk into what I am, the thermocline and oxygen. As is with kills, rivers, seas, the water is of our own naming. I am wet, we call it, because it is a happening, is happening now. Imagined light is light's imagination, a lake shape of it, the obligatory body, its dark burning, reminding us back, memory as filter, desire as login, a hydrology. The lake is alone, we say in Mojave. Every story happens because someone's mouth, a nature-dependent life, a universe. Here at the lake, say, She wanted what she said to slip down into it, for which a good lake will rise. Lake, which once meant sacrifice, which once meant I am devoted. Here I am, atmosphere, sensation, pressure, the lake is beneath me, pleasure bounded, a slip space between touch and not, slip of paper, slip of hand, slip body turning toward slip trouble. I am who slipped the moorings. I am so red with lack. To loop not, or leave the loop beyond the knot. We won't say love because it is. A difference between vertex and vertices, the number of surfaces we break, enough or many to make the lake. Loosened from the rock, one body's dearth is another body's ache. Lay it to the earth. All great lakes are meant to take. Sediment, leg, wrist, the ear, let down and wet with stars, dock lights, distance but wanted. To be held in the well of the eye. Woven like water through itself in and inside, how to sate a depression if not with darkness. If darkness is not fingers brushing a body. Shh, she said. I don't know what the world is. I slip for her, or anything, like language new each time, diffusion, remade and organized, and because nothing is enough, waves, each an emotional museum of water. Left light trembles a lake figure on loop, a night loop. Every story is a story of water, before it is gold and alone, before it is black like a rat snake. I begin at the lake, clean once, now drained. I am murk. I am not clean. Everything has already happened. Always the lake is just up ahead in the poem. My mouth is the moon. I bring it down, lay it over the lake of her thighs, warming, lamping, axe, hewing water's tender shell, slant slip, entering like light, surrounded into another skin, where there was yet no lake. Yet we made it, make it still, to drink and clean ourselves on. Then maybe this poem is too long, so I'll read another poem and then I'll stop there. So I'm going to read a poem from Postcolonial Love Poem. Especially, I think we're talking about language as well, and the languages that carry waters in different ways for us. So this is about the Milky Way and the ways that the Milky Way is a part of our story and existence here in my tribe. How the Milky Way was made. My river was once unseparated, was Colorado, red, fast flood, able to take anything it could wet in a wild rush all the way to Mexico. Now it is shattered by 15 dams over 1,450 miles, pipes and pumps filling swimming pools and sprinklers in Los Angeles and Las Vegas. To save our fish, we lifted them from our skeletoned riverbeds, loosed them in our heaven, set them aster, achi-ahan, Mojave salmon, Colorado pike minnow. Up there they glide gild with stars. You see them now, gold, god large, green sides, lunar white belly to breast, making their great speeded way across the darkest hours, rippling the sapphired sky water into a galaxy road. The blurred wake they drag as they make their path through the night sky is called Achiahan Nunye, our words for Milky Way. Coyote too is up there, locked in the moon after his failed attempt to leap it, fishing net wet and empty slung over his back, a prisoner blue and dreaming of unzipping the salmon's silked skins with his teeth. Oh, the weakness of any mouth as it gives itself away to the universe of a sweet milk body. As my own mouth is desired and dreamed to thirst the long ways, the 100,000 light-year roads of your wrists and thighs. I'll stop there. Now we're coming into the conversation part, the part I've been waiting for.
I feel like I'm resurfacing from deep somewhere after listening. It was really, really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, gracias a ti también.
I feel like that last one you read of the Milky Way, there was a lot of repetition of the word mouth, and in the previous as well. The different parts of the body of a lake, and how our bodies slip into or touch or dream of the lake. It chimed with the kind of title that we picked, I think, which is River Mouth Hercule. Because I thought that captured really nicely something of the body and the way we cannot separate the two, our body and the water around us. Yeah, but maybe we could start by talking about a bit about our different languages and the way that we write through them and into them, or away from them as well. Because you've worked with speakers of the Mojave language. Can you talk a little about that work that you do with those speakers and your own journey with that language?
Yeah, it's very lucky. I did this after graduate school. I came home and I did this like in a different kind of full-time way. I was really lucky that for 5 to 7 years, but 5 solid in this particular way of, I was almost immersed in the language because I spent every waking hour with my elders, and they wake up very early. So it was one of those situations where no matter how early you are, you're always late because they were already awake. And so, one of my best friends and one of my teachers, Hubert, is a singer. So he sings the sun up, which means he gets up early, and I could just never quite make it there on time. But it was a really beautiful. Language is a relationship, so it's a really beautiful relationship, but it's also made me more of who I think I would ever have been without my language. And it's taught me a different kind of, patience or slowness. In some ways it pulls you out of time. And it also, it threads a different kind of loss into you. And I think as you work with language too, it's such a gift when we gain, and then there's also the loss that's simultaneously happening of those things. And I think something that it's offered me that I feel like we're meeting here too, even like you were saying with the title, and you had offered a word that had I'm so interested in the idea of radicals and water, and you can choose to speak toward that or not. But I think even as we were talking about mouth and river, it's a way to decenter the human body, and I don't necessarily just mean our sensual body. I mean the ego body, that ego body part of us that thinks we have to know things, or that judges what is knowledge, or that even judges ourselves. And I think a lot about even the mouth, we say the mouth of the river, but I also believe that, because we know these waters were here first, that I have a mouth because the river first had a mouth. So there's a way that you're kind of flexing back and forth, and physicality and presence becomes something very different. And so I know that I would have a very different relationship with my body if I didn't have the language I have in me. Yeah, so I want to come back to you. And again, it may be of interest to you to kind of share too, like the language you offered that I think really bloomed and opened up the possibility of where we would arrive in this conversation.
Mm. Yeah, I'll share a little bit about that, but well, I grew up with fragments, kind of a background soundtrack, I guess, of a combination of English, Hakka, Cantonese, and also little bits of Mandarin, um, which I would mainly hear whenever we'd visit my grandparents. Um, but I grew up in an English speaking place, an English speaking household. So I did not really ever feel strongly connected to those languages. At, although I think I also grew up with a kind of consciousness that these languages were inside me in another way. Not one that my Saturday language school classes, which I hated, which I completely refused to go to, not in a way that traditional language learning could necessarily get at. And so it was much later that I decided to formally take up Mandarin. And I've been thinking a lot about the accessibility of this language compared to others, I guess other East Asian languages in particular, because Mandarin is the one where there's resources and courses, very, very much not endangered in any way at all, kind of growing rapidly. Whereas then you have Cantonese, which is a very, very widely, very much alive, growing as well, but very, very politicized. And then you have Hakka, which doesn't necessarily have a written script. So I started pulling these threads together when I also went on a full immersion kind of course for 18 months. But I found myself continually looking back towards poetry for a more playful, a more tender, kind of a slower and kinder way of engaging with language and pulling the pieces apart and weighing the pieces like in my hands or in a poem in a way that like memorization and drills was just not going to give me. And yeah, so I think that's where I started to become interested in decentering English as the kind of the center of my linguistic universe, which it is, but I think that I have a physical knowledge or a different kind of fluency of these other languages which are also a part of me. But it's definitely taken time, and so many of us have this shame and this guilt when it comes to language. So there is always that loss, like you said, and this feeling of fluency being a very unstable notion. Like what does it mean to be fluent? It could mean so many different things, and it could change day to day depending how we feel in our bodies when we wake up. Or it feels like it's within reach, but it could just slip away like at any moment. So I became really interested in this unsteady ground and this in-betweenness, which I think poetry gives me. Mm.
I think it's a lucky thing actually, like the in-betweenness, because I think that is one of the largest problems for me with English is that it's such a powerful structure of knowledge,
Mm.
and it has told so many of us about ourselves. And so for me, I mean, I feel like my Mojave language works differently in that, I mean, my teacher Hubert is one of the most curious people I know, even about like his own language. But of course, like he was just told not to speak it and then given English, which was like, this is what things mean, versus this is how things feel. And as you were talking about like taking it apart and the piece is in your hands, like that, like, and as you say, like that is poetry. And I think that's where the physicality I find often missing in English that I'm able to take from Mojave into English, is that I love to take apart the words, and so for me, etymology is not just the OED. We talked a little bit about this in the workshop, so for those folks who are here, I'm speaking a little bit to them as well. And but it's not just about that. It's about all the different people and ways that the words have touched since their beginning, since they were first spoken, who spoke them, and what did it mean to be spoken from that body. And that's like one of the really, for me at least, one of the really lucky things to work with Hubert is that when I ask him about pieces of words, he helps me like pull them apart, and you realize, wait, there's a body in there, or this word is about touch. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about words, but I don't want to over jump. But if it feels like an okay time for you to talk about a couple words that we, Nina and I, for those of you, we were thinking about like a way that we could introduce some words that we feel are like foundational to us right now, or really engaging us, or even where we might arrive. And so what I mean by what you just offered of saying to pull things apart is a word that's been really important to me lately. It's part of my poetic practice. It's part of what I mean when I say I want to treat every body on the page like the body of the beloved. And we have a phrase, it's shortened form, and as a term of endearment is muhan. Muhan. We have a long U vowel, so muhan. And the phrase, it comes from like a larger kind of phrase and resounding, which is numuhan. So it's kind of new muhan, and we have like a funny K. We're allowed to stack consonants together as much as we want, but numuhan, and it's about relationality, and so it can be used with lovers, but it can also just be used with people who want to have a similar kind of care. So in some ways it can very fastly be translated as like, okay, like we see each other. And that's kind of, I know, a cliche right now. It's like, I see you, I hear you, and that's supposed to like make us feel better when we feel alone, right? Someone's like, no, I see you, I hear you. But the verb for seeing is in it, but it's saying like, I see you, I'm watching you, but it means a kind of like care and relationality. And then where it comes from in a different kind of physicality and relationship to land is that it's also the way we talk about that moment in the moment in a day or evening, both, when the sun and the moon are, one is coming up and one is going down. And so we say like numuhan, like they're seeing each other. They're seeing each other, they're holding each other, and like one is holding the other as it's going down so that the other one can lift up. And it's a phrase to me that like I know as I get older I'll learn more about what it really means, but right now it's just been such a generous space for me to think about the ways I engage people or treat people. But so that was like when we were talking, I was like, that's the word I think I want to kind of bring into the conversation. And so, what are some of the words or a word or phrase that you have been, orbiting or carrying inside you?
Yeah, I have a couple, but I'll share the kind of lighter or nicer one first. But that was beautiful to learn your word, and it made me think of the first poem I read was about a particular swim, a late afternoon swim, and very often the sky above I guess perhaps the whole of Aotearoa, particularly above Wellington Harbour. In summer, you'll look up and the moon will have risen, but the sky will be so blue still. And that's a particular kind of Wellington feeling that I really miss and adore. So that made me think of that, which is beautiful. Yeah, my word is an English word, and I think I often, just as I have kind of shame and guilt around my scraps of other languages, I often feel that way about English. I'm like, oh, I'm kind of stuck in English, but also it's our shared language, which, and the language that I'm writing in, and the language I grew in. So it definitely, it is who I am. But yeah, my word is simple, I guess. It's harbour. I love that it's both a noun and an action, to harbour something. I keep having dreams about a harbour. I guess it's a recurring dream. My therapist knows as well. But they're not always bad dreams, but very often I'm standing on the edge of it. And Wellington Harbour is curiously round. You could stand on one side of it and you might think you're on the edge of a lake or a crater, because it was a crater. Or rather, it is a crater. So it was a dormant volcano. I think that's right anyway. But yeah, there's a very small opening of the harbour, which we would call the harbour mouth, but you can't always see it, so there's a sense of enclosure. But it's also volatile. You can feel quite exposed. So I'm interested in the word harbour as, I guess, there's a lot of like metaphor words going on here, but as a vessel, or as something that can hold you, a shape that can maybe contain all complications, all these in-between feelings at the moment that I'm encountering in myself, of this strange time of transition at this very odd, still in a pandemic, but some wanting to be moving out of it. And so, yeah, I'm feeling a kind of a closeness with this word, and I just double checked, because I have to do that. I double checked the Mandarin word for harbour is of course gang, G-A-N-G, gang, and the character does of course contain the water radical, which is 3 drops of water, and so it's part of the kind of the water radical vocabulary that I'm often thinking about, which I became a bit obsessed with when I first started learning or relearning Mandarin. And it was just as simple as a way of helping me get into the language, and to try to, because I was constantly getting lost. And so a way of separating the words was categorizing. And radicals is a really useful way of doing that. And there's hundreds and hundreds of water radical characters. And of course, harbour, it makes sense that harbour is one of them. So that's mine. Yeah.
Well, I'm really struck too by harbor, right? Because again, I think this is like another example of what the land and the water teach us. Because I think harbor, harbor is our human word for what this crater and this land offered. So as the ships were going out, so I'm interested too, because harbor again it's more related to human indwelling versus related to water. But I also love how the word has the the water radical in it, because I feel like the English word doesn't, as far as I know etymologically, I might be wrong, but the English word doesn't hold water in it. And yet the word that you introduced to us and that we were using as like the opening to our conversation does hold the water in it. And so I just, it feels to me just kind of like this beautiful cycle of returning to, I mean, I think the word you'd used when we talked earlier was like elements, right? So the ways that even though sometimes like our languages can dislocate us, we can also build them or return them so that we are also returned back to those elements and to those lands and things. And yeah, and I've been thinking since we talked the first time that just about the wind. Like, it was barely windy here, and I was like, I can't complain about the wind because I've heard of the wind where Nina comes from. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think harbour also has a particular colonial connotation, particularly in Aotearoa and many parts of Asia and the Pacific, which is such a core part of my lineage, and my current way of being. The way we as humans congregate around bodies of water by building harbours or bridges over rivers and so on. I feel like that is something that I'm constantly, whether I like it or not, I'm confronting, particularly now living in somewhere where I never thought I'd live, to be honest, when I was younger, which is the center of empire. It still is, and it's an unavoidable fact when you walk out in the street. But yeah, to be living here and then writing back to these other places, other colonies, is, yeah, something I think reading your work and reading just the way that you write about water and the body has, I think, really fundamentally changed and altered the way that I then view the world as well. And so, yeah.
yeah, I need to learn more about this because I feel like I'm just being like some sort of I mean, I think 80% of most of what I ever do is just wonder and guess. So it's kind of like a what if, but sometimes I say it with such like conviction that it maybe seems a little bit more scientifically proven. But I read somewhere, and I would love to when I have some time to press more on this, or just, I mean, I'm sure there are scholars who have already done this work, so I don't mean to assume I'm the first, but I was reading somewhere. That's how you know things are going awry. As soon as someone says, "Well, I read this somewhere," because who knows where the source is. um, but that the Latin language, and so of course moving into the English language, but that I'm paraphrasing now, so I'm paraphrasing and philosophizing at the same time, but that it was a riverine language, like it is. It grew from a land of rivers, and and I think of like Alice Oswald's work, for example, that my students and I spent a lot of time with this past semester, but yeah, and so I mean, I think like the English language, like you were saying, it's also our language, and I think it's beautiful and it's quite capacious. I think it can be more beautiful and more capacious when we enter our other languages into it, instead of simply translating. But it has a real like capacity to hold and carry and an image water. Um, I'm always like searching and looking at the words, and in the workshop yesterday, one of the things that we talked, or that I showed, was just a list of. I use the digital OED because it produces that side list of words. But I put in river for them, so they had like just all the words in which river is uttered. Sometimes compound words, sometimes like phrases, and then also hydro. And like the language is so beautiful and so active. And so I was really just interested in I'm interested in that, and I want to know more about it because I think I'm always looking for ways to introduce, and this is one of the reasons why I think your work is so compelling to me, and like such a kind of a pathway that I want to be able to continue going down, because I think bringing in our languages, whether they're in pieces or phrases or words, they resound, right? Because it's language is physical, so it's like putting those languages together to touch and see, like, well, what's the third thing that might happen, or the fourth language or words that might come about. So that's been really lucky. But yeah, I don't know if anyone out there knows more about how to connect Latin back to rivers, but I have a lot of faith in it. So
Yeah, I love what you said the language is touching, and then that creating a third space, or a happening, right? Like you write, a river is happening. It's happening now. Um, I feel like we are often talking about a language's or a poem's capacity to hold um, as much as we ourselves are carrying or holding. And for me, I don't know about you actually. I haven't asked you this, but about swimming. Are you a swimmer? Because I am a swimmer, and it's in water where I can feel um, yeah, that lightness, of no longer thinking about being seen or not being seen. Um, Another connection there to the word that you brought us, um, because maybe being held then by the water is enough, and that's really beautiful. But then how to write about that without constantly feeling the loss as well, the loss of a river, of these bodies of water, is something I really struggle with. But it's poetry, I think, that gives me the capacity to just to hold enough. But I wondered if there's any other forms recently where you felt that you there is this capacity to hold and be held, at all in your recent creative practice, any forms of art, or not forms of being.
yeah, one, I'm not a very good swimmer. Which is crazy because I grew up on my reservation. The river is like in our backyard, but I was always playing basketball. So my brothers and sisters would be at the river, and I would be out playing basketball. But our river is also very cold, so it's like 52-ish degrees year round. But I love it, and I love being in it, and we use it as like also a cleaning ritual. But I'm like one of those daring people where I love to jump in it, and then I trust my skills enough to get me back out, but I don't spend a lot of time in it. But one of the things that I've been really excited about in working lately, and I'm using this term very loosely because for me it is another way of language, but I've been doing a lot of like film work, and by film work I mean not even to introduce director producer words in it, but just like taking some cameras out. I mean, we've even used drones, which I am still wrestling with the ways I think about that, but just going out on my river and in my desert and in other desert rivers here recently. I did some video work nearby. But yeah, like just using video and silent video, and or kind of playing with soundscape, like when you can hear the water and when you cannot. And something that's very different about it, you know, it's like, I guess I'll make like a side by side kind of comparison, but for the very first time I've put myself in the film, like in my land or in my water, and that it's such an uncomfortable, like I can be in a room or like at a podium or reading, and I kind of like know how to move my body, and it's a little bit more like basketball. But there's something about being in the film and like knowing my body is being watched in a way that's going to be held, that I look so completely uncomfortable in it. And so I'm still kind of learning, because I'm like, wow, this is a whole new way of being in my desert in ways that I'm super comfortable. But that's been something that has felt just really generative to me and generous. And it's also a way I think I can share my river and the ways that I think about it, or the ways my people think about it, with others, because it really is one of the most beautiful rivers. But yeah, so it's interesting too, because of course, like being within poetry, of course, it's easy to make analogies or comparisons, but it's such a easier eye on the page than for me to be an eye in the screen. And then, you know, you would think like people have said to me like, "Oh, you move gracefully," but I think it's more like a kind of basketball thing, or that I'm like long. But when I see myself in these films, it's almost like hearing my voice. I don't like to hear myself read, but so I don't listen to recordings of myself. But when I see myself in this film, I'm just like, do you even know like how to move your body? Because it, you know, it's just so uncomfortable. And but anyway, that's like a space I've been in. But how about you? Like, are there? I mean, I know there are, but what are some of the other ways like you're kind of engaging or enacting these languages and these images and places and spaces?
Yeah, I've always been interested in the physicality of a poem, and the poem is an object, I think. Um, you know, the shape and the texture of it on the page. And so I think that's what leads me to constantly want to be making things with my hands, basically. And that's where I first got into zine making, which was really freeing in my creative practice, I think, because suddenly like I could make something that didn't exist before out of a sheet of paper. And that's all I'd need, and no one would need to give me permission. And I think there's something about that act of creation, specifically with your hands, that is really particularly nourishing at this time, when in the background I'll often be thinking about loss, imminent doom, but I can still kind of make something with my hands. And then what I've been turning to, like my pandemic hobby, basically, is sewing and learning to make my own clothes. And this has just really forced me to slow down, and also to contend with questions of acquiring things, objects, and the fact of living in a city and seeing things on the various screens that I've got, images of climate destruction, but being in the city that's kind of removed and protected from that, and what that means. But yeah, I guess ideas of weaving, there was the word woven was in your Lake Loop poem. How different textiles and threads have traveled across oceans is something I'm very interested in. Again, inseparable from my own colonial history. And I also recently discovered that my grandfather, my gungung, who lives in Malaysia, when he was a bit younger, he was a quilter. And I had a quilt when I was young. But I always thought that my grandmother had made it, which was just completely my own assumption, because in my head I connected quilting with grandma's. But it was my gong gong instead, and he's got an old sewing machine, which is still there in the corner of the living room. And so that's a quilt which then was made in my mother's homeland in Malaysia and carried across the sea to his various grandchildren. So I think we each had a quilt. And so that's really brought me such joy and given me a new purpose in my body, which has been really useful in the way that maybe swimming is as well, and like for you basketball and being out, being a new way of being, a quiet way, which has been really lovely. And I'm thinking of ways that it's intersecting with my writing, because it certainly does, but I'm still working out exactly how. But I think, thinking of color and materials are always on my mind, I think, when I'm both reading and writing poetry. So it's all connected.
Well, it reminds me of the harbor too, right? Like as you were saying, these threads have traveled, and how, uh, like coloniality and the harbor, but also how it's such a part of our arrivals, and also that we had arrivals and receivings that occurred long before the colonial harbor needed to be so large and like built for a ship, for example, and needed to have like a lot of course, I think in the beginnings they always say temporary structures that somehow then become the city. But yeah, so that's really beautiful, and it's as you're talking about weaving and quilting, and we were talking about like the different modes other than poetry. I'm thinking of the safe zone, and I don't know if you want to talk about that, but as it's I read that with my students, and I thought it was really beautiful, and I also marveled at the like the sustainability of that energy, that I think happens in poetry, that you're able to keep, pushing and turning in different ways, but in that form. So I don't, and I don't know if you want to talk about content also or just form, but I'm compelled by both. So I'll offer that as a possibility for you to.
Yeah, I would love to. The Safe Zone is an essay. In fact, I think one of the longest pieces of writing I've ever written, because I don't know about you, but I really I turn to poetry partly because I have a short attention span, and I'm like, I want a fragment, and I very often think of almost any project that I'm coming to as an assortment of fragments, and I can really only start that way by going, what's the first fragment, and then how can I just kind of loosely weave them together. And so it's poetry that gave me that, I think, and then that's then how I've started to think about prose. Like the shape and texture of an essay, how it can move down the page or down the screen just as much as we would think of that for a poem. And I think it's actually some of your prose poems that have definitely helped give me that flexibility, that malleability, thinking of the length of a line. And I think sometimes in writing prose, I'm just feeling like I need to write a longer line. And then that will give me a different momentum, a different energy, like you said. But yeah, that piece in particular, which begins and ends with whales, with orca, it was a strange one. I didn't know how it was going to come together. But I've long been obsessed with killer whales since I was a kid. And I kind of, like, I feel that my alternate career, might be like marine biologist. but I never knew how to channel that energy into my creative work. And I've definitely found ways now. I've got lots of whale poems. But yeah, again, I kept thinking about these strange dreams I was having about beaching whales. And there was, a few years ago, there was a mass stranding at the top of the South Island in New Zealand. And I feel like every time this happens, there's articles pop up, like why do whales strand, and the various destructive disturbances that are happening in the waters surrounding these areas, particularly like shipping lanes, right? And this is not new, though. There's also a strange ancientness in the way people talk about whale strandings. But yeah, I became very obsessed with this and obsessed with captivity. And so all these things came together and became a way of me writing about my anxiety. And that extended to climate anxiety, but also just very much bodily. Yeah, all my various obsessive patterns of thinking, very often about the elements actually, and weather, waves, tsunami, which is a risk where I live, which is a very volatile earthquake zone. So yeah, all these things came together, and a lot of nervous energy went into that essay, which I think gives it that maybe urgency that you describe. But it's amazing that you've been reading that with your class. And yeah, I think, yeah, reading your prose poetry, I think, has given me a lot of openings into exploring form.
Yeah, it was lucky, and I remember thinking at the end, one, I think I didn't realize how long it was. I mean, as I was reading it, because again of that energy. So I want to ask, well, one, after I was done reading it, I was like, I'm not sure if this is like something that tourists would make tourists want to go there, or would make them not want to go there. Because I was thinking of like the earthquakes and everything. But I want to know, just like when you swim, do you swim laps? Because, you know, as you were talking about swimming, there was just something about it. Like you could feel like the length of where you were going. And then suddenly it was like it was back to this, not a beginning, but to just kind of an energy that it had built, but was able to return back to, and then like extend out. But so I don't know, like because I definitely feel the basketball in my work, like a kind of momentum. So, and I mean, you don't have to spend too much time on this, but I'm just wondering, like in your swimming, like is it laps, or do you just go out distance, or?
Wow, yeah, I love this. So not really, no, not laps, but where I swim here in London, which I haven't in like a couple of months because I'm not such a good midwinter swimmer, but there's a women-only swimming pond on Hampstead Heath, which I've written about a lot. And I do swim that in a loop, and it's
Mm.
like maybe a 10-minute loop. And yeah, and that repetition definitely allows for that kind of meditative thing that you get from kind of uh, that kind of exercise, I guess. But interesting, it's not a perfect circle. You're swimming the border or the perimeter of a man-made body of water, which is interesting, and you're swimming amongst the ducks, sometimes swans, sometimes herons, which is really lovely, and kind of strangely peaceful in a city like London. But then swimming in Wellington Harbour is really different. I think I'm very often going out and then swimming parallel to the shore, partly for safety, I guess, because there's quite of waves and winds, and that way you're kind of, yeah, for me anyway, I'm not like getting too far out because I'm not a brave swimmer. I just kind of go in without thinking, and then like paddle a bit, splash around, and then yeah, and then make my way back. And it's very cold as well, always, it's never ever warm. So yeah, so I realized in saying this, what I'm describing is kind of tracing the shape of the
Hmm.
shore very often, following the line or following a loop, which is really nice. And I'm going to be thinking now for a while, how do these shapes and how does swimming strokes come into my poetry, which I love. So thank you for that.
Great. I'm wondering. I know we were going to end with reading, but I'm actually forgetting if we were going to do questions. So I just wanted to do a quick check-in and see where we were and how we wanted to. Um,
Yeah, maybe we could see if there's any questions or if Olivia wanted to ask us anything, and then we could maybe close at the very end with our poems.
this is the first time I've been like, you're making me more responsible. This is the first time. This is the first time suddenly I was like, oh, let's make sure we stay with the schedule.
Yeah. Nice.
We do have a question. We have a question from Helena, which is directed to you, Natalie. Helena asks, you have spoken a little about the physicality of language and also mentioned you're a basketball player. I'm wondering if or how this may inform your poems or the process of writing.
Yeah, I mean, it goes perfectly with what what we were kind of talking about right now. Like even as Nina was describing, like tracing the pond and what that means in language. In some ways, maybe language is only ever tracing the body, perhaps. I mean, I would probably argue about that tomorrow, but that feels like something to think about. But I definitely think that the reasons that I played basketball and the things that made me good at basketball are also the things that like drive me in poetry. So it is about physicality and it is about touch, you know. And as much as it's about touch as like a kind of resistance, you know, like you know the way that I move, because I grew up in a big family, is I know myself by what I'm pressing up against. And sometimes that's frustrating to have a conversation with me because I'm always pressing against it first. And it doesn't mean I don't agree. I just want to kind of know like what the shape is so I kind of know where my body is. Um, and it's also very much about spacing, you know. And so there's something I think that poetry holds that is about tension, but I'm not only writing, and at least I want to make sure I'm not only writing against some things, especially like as a native, as a queer person, as a Latinx person. I don't, and then because my work does hold the politic in it, I don't only want to write against that thing, right? And I also want to be uh, joyous in it and celebratory in it, which is what is lovely about. Yeah, I can hold the fact that my river is disappearing, and I can also talk about the luck of being able to dunk down in it 4 times and to come up new. Um, and so I think there's that. And something I was sharing, I talked with a group of Native basketball players yesterday. Um, but there's also something very about the physicality. I think it, there's something very futuristic about basketball in that you're always thinking ahead, and not with knowledge, but with a what if. You know, like what if? So like you would never go directly to the ball. Like if you're ever guarding the ball, like you're going to get beat. So you're always like ready to move 2 steps ahead of where your defender might go. Or if the ball passes, you already know like how you're going to move on the court, which, we could make a kind of generic court page, but I think it's bigger than that. Um, and so I think in that way, what it offers you about future is that the future is not something very long far off. It's the momentum that's happening now and that will shift and become whoever and whatever you are next and whatever your relationship will be next. And so I think even with conversations like this, like, like this whole configuration and energy that is being built, and the way it's allowing people to kind of have this autonomy of presence and energy, but that is also uh, in the moment shifted by the other energies and happenings around them. So even now, like in this conversation, like I have so many notes because I think I know what I think about something, but then being alongside Nina and then also hearing your work, Nina, um, yeah, so I think basketball is to me one of the closest things to poetry, and I think the way that I tend to write is still maybe the way I tend to do everything, because I was built by basketball in a way, is like physical. So when I write, I'm like what's that word? Or like often I have to like catch myself, because when I hear people read, I'm like like I kind of am looking for that physicality. Um, but yeah, and so and I think too, Nina, you were talking a little bit about that, about trying to like find the questions and the relationships to that that physicality, that being in the water. Yeah, but I appreciate that question, and it's something I think about a lot, and I might never have an answer, but I think it's such an important thing for me to always return to, because I think in the end, uh, the way that I move in the world is very much shaped by basketball, and something that feels important to me is that the attention and intention I have on the page is something I would like to have more of in my life off the page, you know, with people I know, or with strangers, or with every interaction, which is which is difficult, you know. It's not always easy. And then you know, and then people also think you're strange when you do that. So that's
Thank you, Natalie. I wanted to ask you both a question, and to see if you could both speak a bit about the presence or entanglement of truth, myth, or fiction in your work, and what those terms mean to each of you.
Yeah, I do think about how I'm telling the various stories that make me and make my family, and I'm very, very often writing memories. And I guess I started out writing, I started out thinking of myself as a writer in a creative nonfiction workshop. So very early on, there was this kind of delineation of writing that is true and writing that is not. But for me, I don't know if in my creative practice, I don't know if that's so useful for me, in the way that I'm always like resisting anyone kind of categorizing not just my work, but of course me and myself. I'm reading at the moment a novel by novelist and nonfiction writer Alexander Chee, and he's got a line which I which I underlined. I mean, I underlined a lot of his writing, but his character is multiracial like me, and there was a line about looking at me takes longer than looking at other people. So the character is noticing people seeing him and watching him longer than they watch other people. And that for me was so true, so deeply, deeply true, and not something I'd ever articulated before. And I think, and yeah, I'm really losing myself here, but I think I'm, seeing myself. I don't easily fit into this category that someone's looking to place me in when they look at me very often. That's what I mean when that's what I was getting at. And so I think in the same way, I am quite often not discarding truth, but looking at maybe getting at the feeling or the texture of a memory rather than necessarily the truth of it. Because very often I think what things I do remember might actually be that I'm remembering a photograph and that kind of thing. So I'm really interested in that and how we end up telling these stories about ourselves. For me, yeah, I don't know if truth is such a useful thing for me to be holding myself against when I'm writing. Yeah, what about you, Natalie?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think it's so important as well, right? I guess I think that language itself is not responsible for truth. I think maybe right now, as you're asking, Olivia, like I wonder if language is capable of truth. Um, and I think poetry certainly cannot tell the truth. Many people will argue with this, and I welcome because I'm just this will be the beginning of a wonder. I really appreciate the question, but I think poetry is not capable of it, and I don't think it needs to be. Like I don't think that's why it happened. I don't think that's like why we're drawn to it and why we're drawn to one another's works. But I think the responsibility is ours as humans, right? Because I don't think, for example, that there are animals out there wondering about truth, right? Like it's our responsibility and not in language but in our practices, in our actions. And I realize, of course, like I believe language is one of our practices of emotionality, relationality. Um, and maybe this is where I'll bring myth in, like why I think myth is so important. Like I have a line in my work, and I'm sure that this is a line that many other people have used in different variations, but I say, America is my myth. And to me, there's such power in that because it comes with an impossibility of truth. As soon as we frame it with myth, it's like everyone knows it's not true. It's going to be imaginative or magical realism. But I think that what myth offers us, like, which can be dangerous in many ways. It can be dangerous to certain power structures, but it can also be dangerous in that we get inculcated into power structures, or we're not. It causes us to maybe have negative actions, or to be moved, or to not be moved toward inaction. But I guess like that's the thing for me that I'm thinking, at least right now, with you and with that question, is that I like a little bit of what you were saying, Nina, is like that truth is maybe not a place that you're necessarily like holding as you write. And I think for me, yeah, I think and not that all language is metaphor or anything like that, but I do think like maybe I'm only ever writing the myth, and that is actually where the importance is, because the fact, like, to say America is my myth, it, in one way I feel like it can possibly enact like a denial of the way America functions or the way it believes. But it also offers like this field of possibility that says, well, I can still imagine into it and beyond it and through it. But yeah, that's a very generous question that I will be thinking about for a while. I know I left fiction out, but yeah, that's like the start of like 4 or 5 essays. I think that everyone out here should. I think that'll be the next anthology, is built on these questions. But it's a beautiful question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both for your answers. I'm conscious of time, and I know you both wanted to share or read something just before we close the event. Nina, shall we move back to you to share first, and then we'll move on to Natalie?
Yeah, thank you, Olivia, for your question as well. This has been a really lovely space this evening to be held in, actually. And I'm gonna bring it back to the harbour because this poem, which is called The First Wave, is about that same harbour where in 2013 there was an earthquake. Thankfully not a very serious one, but it did trigger a tsunami evacuation warning across a large part of the lower North Island and northern South Island. But I wasn't there at the time. I was in Shanghai in my dorm room listening to the radio for updates, which was a very strange, disembodied experience. And so this is a kind of found poem of the radio announcements that I was hearing. The First Wave, 14 November 2016. They request that we inform you immediately. You are standing on soft ground. The ceiling lights are swinging in the background. The waves crash, then dissipate. The first wave may not be the largest. This is a flow-on event, so do not go near. Do not stay and watch the land slipping. It has triggered other faults like a network of nerves, and the seabed has risen out of the sea. There are visible ruptures running along the landscape. This is a flow-on event, but the moon does not cause earthquakes. The ceiling lights are a typical pattern of aftershocks, and they request that we inform you. You are a visible rupture running along the landscape. Do not stay and watch your nerves slipping. There will be strong currents in the background. The moon has risen out of the sea. The first wave crashes, then dissipates. You are standing on such soft ground. Thank you.
Gracias, Nina. And I'll finish, we've talked a little bit about grief and like how to hold both. I'll finish with this poem, Grief Work. Why not now go toward the things I love? I have walked slow in the garden of her, gazed the black flower dilating her animal eye. I give up my sorrows the way a bull gives its horns, astonished, and wishing there is rest in the body's softest parts. Like Jacob's angel, I touched the garnet of her hip, and she knew my name, and I knew hers. It was auxochromo, it was chromophoro, it was Eliza. When the eyes and lips are brushed with honey, what is seen and said will never be the same. So why not take the apple in your mouth, in flames, in pieces, straight from the knife's sharp edge? Achilles chased Hector around the walls of Ilium 3 times. How long must I circle the high gate between her hip and knee to solve the red gold geometry of her thigh? Again the gods put their large hands in me, move me, break my heart like a clay jug of wine, loosen a beast from some dark long depth. My melancholy is hoofed. I, the terrible, beautiful Lampone, a shining devour horse tethered at the bronze manger of her collarbones. I do my grief work with her body, labor to make the emerald tigers in her throat leap, lead them burning green to drink from the deep violet jetting her breast. We go where there is love, to the river, on our knees beneath the sweet water. I pull her under 4 times until we are rivered, we are rearranged. I wash the silk and silt of her from my hands. Now who I come to, I come clean to, I come good to.
Thank you so much, Nina and Natalie, for these beautiful readings and conversation. I'd also just like to say thank you again to Sarah and Linda for their collaboration developing the series. A word of thank you also to Nottingham Trent University and the University of Nottingham for supporting our events. And finally, to my colleagues Jim, Helen and Catherine for all of their support on tonight's event. Finally, I'd just like to invite everyone to our next Five Bodies live reading, which will take place on Thursday, the 10th of March, when we'll be joined by Jason Allen Paysont and Mina Gorgi. Thank you again, Natalie and Nina. See you all soon.
Gracias. Ciao.